Hello, hello, folks. It is a lovely Saturday afternoon. I am here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I've got plenty of the unnamed diet beverage that will not be named, which I love to drink because it's full of caffeine and gives me energy. And we have got so much to talk about on the final Saturday of the month of June. What a day it is. What a day it is. So much to discuss. I hope you're all joining me. I hope you're all tweeting this out, spreading the word, inviting all your friends to join me. We are going to have a great discussion here for the next little bit. Got a lot of things to discuss. Got many things on the agenda, even though it is summertime. Even though everyone gets into that, and it's hot, and you feel tired. Even though that's the case, the world has not slowed down. The world continues to move ahead at a very, very, very fast pace. So much to discuss. Wow. We had not one, but 2 nights of Democratic Party primary debates. And we've got some reaction to that. I'll be happy to engage with you all about those debates, as we say. Furthermore, we've got the G20 taking place right now in Osaka, in Japan. We've got President Putin, President Xi, President Trump, all meeting. Wow, so much to discuss. Libya, ever since NATO, pushed by the United States, pushed specifically from Hillary Clinton in the State Department and her staff of advisors like Anne-Marie Slaughter. Ever since that was the case, ever since Libya has been toppled, ever since the overthrow of the Libyan government, things in that country have been in utter chaos, and that chaos continues to spin out of control. Wow, we have got so much to discuss today, so if you have not already done it, please post this, share this, spread the link, bring people in. We've got so much to talk about. Yes, I will be talking about Andrew Yang's mic being cut off. Yes, I will be talking about Tulsi Gabbard's surge. Yes, I will be talking about the comments we heard from Bernie Sanders. Yes, I will be talking about the poor performance by Joe Biden. Yes, we will get to all of that. So much on our plate. We'll talk about the G20. We'll talk about Putin and Xi and Trump and everything. So much to discuss. But before we get to that, you know, folks, I live in Brooklyn. I live here in Brooklyn. This is my lovely apartment where I do my lives. I stay away from Manhattan on the weekends if I can. It's a bit of a, it's like an hour or so on the train all the way into Manhattan. I work in Manhattan. I live in Brooklyn. This weekend in particular, I am staying very, 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 very far away from Manhattan. And it's not a political statement. It has nothing to do with politics. But the reason being that this is Pride Weekend. And Pride Weekend is just a traffic jam and a half, right? Anyone who's lived in New York City knows that Pride Weekend, when the Gay Pride March comes through, Sunday, don't get anywhere near Manhattan. Don't think about driving through Manhattan, especially not Greenwich Village. Just forget it. And this year in particular, with the anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, with basically the founding incident that sparked what we now know as the gay rights movement, they're calling it World Pride. It's going to be big. It's going to be huge. It's already huge. When I was leaving Manhattan on Friday, the crowds were already gathering. It's big, big, big. And so, and that's the case. I'm staying away from Manhattan because I just know that it's going to be packed full of people. And, you think about it, the gay rights movement in terms of where it was in 1969 to where it is today, it's come pretty far. And, you always wonder, I thought, what might I say about that? What I thought I might say about that was, there was a news item that came across my news feed earlier this week. And it made me smile a little bit, because there's a 97-year-old minister. I guess you could call him a minister. That's a little bit generous. There's a 97-year-old evangelist in Ohio by the name of Ernest Angley. And he, opposes gay marriage, opposed to homosexuality, and now they recently caught him on tape bragging about all the gay sex that he has had throughout his life. And this isn't the first time he's been caught. People have kind of known this guy was in the closet and doing stuff for years. But what's funny about this is that, you all have probably never heard of Reverend Ernest Angley, but when I was a kid in Ohio, you could not escape Reverend Ernest Angley because he owned one of the main Warner Brothers WB TV stations. That's how much money this man had. Because his thing was he wasn't just a pastor or a preacher, he was a faith healer. Reverend Ernest Angley claimed he could heal people, and so he bought a local TV station. And from his cathedral in Akron, Ohio, he would broadcast himself healing people. And we would all just make fun of it. Everyone thought it was the craziest thing. I mean, people were very religious where I grew up, but faith healer Reverend Ernest Angley, everyone thought he was just a clown. And you'd be watching a regular TV program on Warner Brothers or something, and then all of a sudden they would cut away, and now we bring you a special with Reverend Ernest Angley. And he would come out there, and he was a heavy-set fellow, and he would come out there, and he had this smile on his face, and he'd say, "Happy, happy Jesus to you. Happy Jesus to you." And I always wondered, is like Jesus a holiday? Happy Jesus, like it's happy birthday or happy New Year's. It's happy Jesus to you, right? We all know that Pat Robertson, he had the 700 Club. Ernest Angley had the 99 Club. Happy Jesus to you. And then his thing was he would have people lined up, and people from all over the world would come to Akron, Ohio, to his giant cathedral. And they would come to his giant cathedral so that he could heal them. And they would line up, and, someone would come up, and he'd be like, "What's wrong with you there?" And he'd say, they'd say, "I have cancer." He'd be like, "Heal, heal." And then they would take them off the stage. And the weird thing was, they never did like a follow-up, so you never really got to see if the healing worked, right? They'd walk on the stage, "Reverend Ernest Angley, I have cancer." Heal! He would heal them, and there was never like a follow-up. There was never you never got to see it. I remember one time, there was a woman who came on the stage with Reverend Ernest Angley. She came on the stage, and she walked on, and he said, "What's wrong with you," or whatever. She says, well, she had addiction to smoking. She was smoking. She was trying to quit smoking. So he put his hand on her head and he said, "Foul demons of nicotine addiction, begone, heal, heal." I mean, it was the weirdest thing. And then he would always end his show by then turning to the audience, turning to the camera, pointing at the camera, having his hand out like this, and then he would heal you through the TV. He'd be like, "Heal, heal," and he would heal you through the television. Right? So I don't know, it's like magically healing you of your illness through the television. And then he would say, "And remember, you are special to God." And that was it. And it was the weirdest thing, right? And there's a lot of these faith healers across the USA, right? I mean, they've been around for a long time. It's been a thing. But they catch them, right? Because they'll heal somebody in a wheelchair. Turns out the person's not actually disabled. They'll pull them out of the wheelchair and they'll start dancing, and everyone will be like, "Wow, he did it." And then you look into it and the person's not actually disabled. He never did that. Ernest Angley kept it pretty simple, right? The people walked on the stage. He said, "Heal, heal." And they walked off the stage, and that was it, right? Would it work? Would it not work? And they would ask him, "Can you heal people?" He would say, "I don't heal anyone. Only Jesus heals people." It was the weirdest thing, right? And they never took him down because he never really went all out with the lying, right? He just kind of did the magic, said the magic words. He was the shaman, I guess, right? And the idea was, and apparently people did it, right? People, from, South Africa and Asia and Eastern Europe and all kinds of places, they run out of money. The doctor says they have no chance of living. They'd get on a plane and fly to Ohio and walk up to Reverend Ernest Angley on the stage, and he would heal, and maybe it wouldn't work, right? Who knows? They never really did a follow-up. And he would raise a lot of money, right? And people wondered about his voice, right? His voice was just the weirdest thing. You can look on YouTube for this guy. Weirdest thing, his voice would heal. "I'm Reverend Ernest Angley, heal. You talk like this." It was the weirdest thing. He did this whole voice that didn't sound particularly normal. When he was not on stage, he didn't talk like this. It was weird. It was the weirdest thing. So lo and behold, a phrase I overuse, now we know that Reverend Ernest Angley was gay. He was gay. He brags about it. He's 97 years old at this point, and he's retired. He's not doing the weekly broadcasts, but now we know that he's been caught on tape bragging to other people about all the gay sex he's been having for years while he's been doing his show. So that was one of the strangest things. But the man's a multi-millionaire. It's one of the strangest things I'd ever seen. But if you grew up in Northeast Ohio like I did, there was no way you could escape from Reverend Ernest Angley. It was the weirdest thing. Oh, let me add that just like Donald Trump, he wore a really bad toupee. He had this really over-the-top wig that was so obviously a wig, People used to joke, is it... why couldn't he heal himself from his baldness? But that's, silliness. It was the weirdest thing. So now we know that Reverend Ernest Angley, who's been caught doing all kinds of bad things for years, Big Haywood says it was obvious he was gay back in the 80s. A lot of people knew this already, but now we have an audio tape of him at 97 years old bragging about his gay sex. So as the Pride weekend in New York City, the ultimate World Gay Pride, is going down, think about Reverend Ernest Angley and how strange that all turned out to be. And yes, a lot of people had a lot of suspicions about him for a long time. There you go. Yes, he was a con artist, as Eve says. Definitely a con artist. But the way he got away with it for so long, interesting, is he didn't take it as far as some of them do, right? That guy who claimed he could talk to dead people. And, these con artists, they come and they go and they exist. But he got away with it for so long because he didn't push it too far, right? It was just kind of walk on the stage, heal, and then he would heal you through the TV, heal, and people would send him money, and that was that. Very, very, very strange. So I know you didn't all tune in today to hear me talk about Reverend Ernest Angley. You wanted me to talk about the Democratic Party debates. So what a debate, or should I say debates? It was 2 nights. 2 nights. 2 nights of debates. What do you folks think? I certainly have some strong opinions about what I saw. I really, really do. Wow. I also have some strong opinions about what we did not see. But first of all, why don't we start with Joe Biden? I think Joe Biden gave up, right? We've all seen those creepy tapes of him smelling little girls' hair and touching little girls inappropriately and being all creepy and all of that. We've all seen the tapes. And I think what happened is Joe Biden said, you know what? I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I just don't want to do this. And so he went out there, right? And they all of them took turns, knocking down Joe, and didn't really defend himself. He doesn't want the job. He doesn't want to run against Donald Trump. I mean, he's seen the tapes. He knows what they've got on him. He doesn't want to do this. He's old. He's retired. I noticed he looked a little skinnier, right? Maybe perhaps he's lost some weight. I don't think Joe's heart is really in this. He could have run against Trump the first time, chose not to. And I think he just kind of, he went out there, he's running because there's all kinds of pressure on him to run, and he just said, that's it. And I think Joe Biden's throwing in the towel. That's what I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Tulsi Gabbard did amazingly well. All right, they treat Tulsi Gabbard like she's a fringe candidate. They treat her like she's not serious. And Tulsi Gabbard, despite the fact that she didn't get as much time as the other candidates, despite the fact that she actually got attacked, like she got, criticized by one of the moderators, they called her out and basically accused her of being anti-gay and said, why should we trust you? Tulsi Gabbard did amazingly well. And after the debate, there was a surge and people who had never heard of Tulsi Gabbard before. I've known Tulsi Gabbard for a long time. But there was a surge of people who had never heard of Tulsi Gabbard before, searching for Tulsi Gabbard. And the media now wants us to believe that surge in searches for Tulsi Gabbard was a conspiracy by Russia. I kid you not. That's what they're trying to say now. Tulsi Gabbard did very well in the debate, made a fool out of Tim Ryan, the pro-war congressman who insists that, we have to keep occupying Afghanistan, we have to keep that war going. Tulsi Gabbard, a veteran of the military who says the war's time is up, who says that Saudi Arabia, she said that Saudi Arabia was protecting Al-Qaeda. Bold anti-war positions, right? And there was a surge in interest in her, right? People are comparing it to the Ron Paul phenomenon, right? When Ron Paul was kind of unheard of, but he got on the stage in the Republican debates 2008 and was talking anti-war, and all of a sudden there was kind of a surge of interest in Ron Paul, right? Beneath the surface, Americans are tired of all these wars. So when someone comes along who talks an anti-war line, there's an interest in them. And Tulsi Gabbard, she has been a longtime critic of U.S. foreign policy, and she, when it comes to Syria, when it comes to Libya, when it comes to the threats of war against Iran, she's been outspokenly opposed. And she's gone to Syria. She's been supportive of the Syrian government in its fight against terrorism. And because of that, she's been hated, just blasted, not only by the pro-war wings of the establishment, but also the pseudo-left that just can't stand anyone who doesn't want to join the CIA revolution to bring down the Syrian government. She's just been attacked from all sides, but she has a very big following, and a lot of people like her. And she did amazingly well at the debate, and she called out Saudi Arabia. She made Tim Ryan, the pro-war guy, look like a fool, almost as if he didn't know what the war in Afghanistan was really about. She did amazingly well. And so the media has already declared that no, she didn't do amazingly well, right? That she actually, according to the mainstream liberal DNC line, no, she didn't do amazingly well. The idea that she did amazingly well is a conspiracy from Russia. I mean, this is how discourse has gotten, right? If you go against mainstream discourse, you're a Russian agent, right? Anything that goes against the grain is a conspiracy from Russia. That's basically the line that we're getting. It's very, very scary. I think she did very, very well. She came out ahead. People who wouldn't have considered voting for her before are now supporting her. She has a level of support coming out of those debates that she didn't have before. Tulsi Gabbard really stole the show on the first evening. No question about that. And she didn't get equal amount of airtime, and she didn't get equal amount of airtime. She got tougher, gotcha questions accusing her of being anti-gay, and had to explain how she'd changed her mind after growing up in a socially conservative household. But she did well. She was running an uphill battle. And that brings me to Andrew Yang. So Andrew Yang, he was on the second night, not the first night with Tulsi. And for those of you who watched it, I'm sure you noticed they did a different style, where anyone can just jump in at any time. Right? The idea was, someone starts talking and then you just jump in, and it was more of a free-for-all, right? Well, turns out it wasn't as much of a free-for-all as you thought. Andrew Yang's mic was silenced. Many times he tried to jump in, like all the other candidates were, and he couldn't. His mic was silenced. So, the debates are very much rigged. Right? Some candidates get more time than other candidates. Some candidates get to jump in, other candidates don't. Yeah. Andrew Yang is speaking out, and there you go. Rather interesting, isn't it? I must say, and forgive me if I'm stepping on any toes here, I am not impressed with Marianne Williamson. She is going to harness the power of love to defeat Donald Trump, and love will win. Oh my gosh. Oh, goodness gracious, right? Yeah. Whoa, I listened to her, and I think that's a lot of drugs, and that's a lot of marijuana, and that's a lot of LSD, and that's a lot of hippy-dippy mysticism, and oh boy, yeah, I would like to not hear Marianne Williamson. She's probably a great spiritual advisor for Oprah, right? She probably gives her great spiritual advice and talks to the angels inside of her very, very well, and communicates with the great beyond and the asteroids, and I don't know, man. Wow. Why did that happen? I just wanted to look away. I would hear Marianne Williamson talk, and I would just want to look away. The other thing now, interestingly, Bernie Sanders. Now, I will say, I have a new respect for Bernie Sanders coming out of last night, because I got the impression when he spoke that he was trying to send the message, look, he knows he's on TV, he knows he's a front runner, but I think he also has a feeling that, just like last time, they're not going to let him get the nomination. And he was up there and he repeated the point. We need a mass movement. And that seemed to be, he emphasized political revolution, he emphasized struggle against the billionaires, he brought up the legacy of the civil rights movement, brought up the legacy of the labor movement, and he just emphasized we need people in the streets, we need struggle. He was basically saying we need class struggle. And that there's an element in that I can really, really respect. And it seemed like, he's an old man. And it seems like, if you listen to his campaign speeches where he goes over his life story, he talks about, the civil rights movement, he's trying to inspire a new generation of activists. He knows his support, he is loved by millennials, by Generation Z, by young people that are facing economic difficulties, and he's carrying that torch of class struggle. And he is trying to inspire young people to get involved in the political process and fight for their economic rights and fight for economic justice. And that his campaign is not really, it's not about him per se. It's not about one guy. It seems to be about that message, right? What is it they say, right? Everything we have because we fought for it. Don't you know the bosses give nothing away, right? The class struggle. That seems to be what his campaign is about. He is carrying the torch, the mantra of workers versus the bosses, the billionaire monopolists versus working families, the 99% and the 1%, working class, left-wing populism. He's carrying that torch, and he wants to get that torch, that message, that understanding. He wants that to be on, people's minds as much as possible. Now, when he calls himself a socialist, he's basically taken that to mean a European Keynesian welfare state, social democracy, he's not really calling for socialism. He's backed away. At one point, he was very supportive of governments like Cuba, Nicaragua, and such. He's backed away from that. But he's bringing a message. He's about something bigger than himself. And I think, watching the way he talked, it's almost like, you almost get kind of a weird, scared feeling when you watch him. Like, this is like watching, like Lord of the Rings, right? And it's, before Gandalf dies, he has some kind of premonition that he's going to go away, and he's saying, listen, my son, I will give you a message before I go. Like, he's telling us things that we need to hear really, really badly. Right, it's the wise old man warning us. Right, it has an eeriness to it. Right, he's telling us something. He's telling the country, look, if you don't learn to fight for your economic rights, things are going to get difficult pretty soon. Right, he's a voice crying out in the wilderness. Right, it's got an eeriness to it. Right, that he's up there. He's thundering the same message. He says, look, I may not be here too much longer. They may rig it against me and not let me run, but I'm telling you, if you don't learn to fight for your economic rights, if you don't learn to struggle and fight back and resist and stand up against the greed of the monopolists and against capitalism, if you don't learn to struggle and fight, things are going to get bad. I'm telling you it, and I'm telling you it, and I'm telling you it over and over again. And he's repeating himself, and it's got an eerie value to it, right? I mean, there's hope in his campaign. He's saying things that wouldn't be considered to be that radical in other countries, right? I mean, the notion that people should be provided with health care and college, it's not something that you would be considered on the extreme wing of politics to advocate in any other country. But here in the United States, with our history of settlerism and the way that, since the Cold War especially, that free market, stuff has been, basically we've been told that's our identity as Americans, that who we are the free market. That's what he's doing. He's trying to wave that banner of class struggle, and he's doing a very, very good job of it. And he may win. I mean, he's a front runner, right? And the polls show that if he was the nominee, he could very easily beat Donald Trump. However, there are sections of the establishment in the Democratic Party that I think are determined to stop him, and it's going to be an interesting campaign. I'm not endorsing any candidate, as folks know. There are some candidates I think are more interesting than others, but with all the candidates, there are things I agree with and things I disagree with. I will say that I think a lot of people underestimate how dangerous Kamala Harris is. Kamala Harris. Think about Kamala Harris. Now, Kamala Harris, right? She was the top prosecutor in California, and she oversaw a mass expansion of the prison population. She was a lock-em-up woman. And if you go over her record when she was the top prosecutor, the California district attorney, the state attorney general, look over her record. Not only was she viciously and excited about locking people in jail and doing a huge amount of locking people up, not only was that the case, and we're talking private prisons here too, as Eve points out, yes, but she broke the law. I mean, and that's on record. She went out of her way to put innocent people in jail. Right? She went out of her way to put innocent people in jail. The California Supreme Court ruled against her on various occasions, talking about how she had basically, it looks like, look into what was written about her and about how evidence was treated and how every effort was made to keep people who she very well knew was innocent in jail. Now, what kind of person could do that, right? What kind of person does that? And when you listen to Kamala Harris speak, you'll notice that, it's interesting. She likes to avoid taking a position. She likes to avoid taking an actual position, right? She can't get straight what her position is on Medicare for all or universal coverage or what. She's not real clear on what her position is. But she likes to tell a touching story about, somebody somewhere who's suffering. And they're being treated so bad. And the person who's responsible for treating them so bad is this. And I am gonna be mean. And it's a demagogical technique where she's telling a story. She's inciting you to be angry and to let her be a rageful vehicle for your anger. That's basically what she's doing. She's appealing to a rageful side of you. And she's telling a personal story, but she's avoiding actually taking a position. And, I mean, if you look over her record, there's some pretty ugly skeletons in her closet. She wrote a whole book trying to present herself as if she had been some kind of social justice warrior from her position in California. But her record is very, very ugly. It's very, very, very ugly. And she is very much the police state woman. I mean, she, laughs and jokes about how she had a policy of jailing parents because their kids miss school. Right? And she thinks that's hilarious, right? No, the kids are skipping school, lock the parents in jail. Right? She makes fun of people that were protesting for more money for schools and opposing the prison industrial complex. And she's on video mocking people that march and protest against it. Now she's trying to frame herself as if she is the one who leads that movement. And many people have pointed out that a lot of the Hillary Clinton backers have gone over to her. Kamala Harris is very, very, very dangerous. She is very, very, very dangerous. And, you can't really underestimate how dangerous she is. I have said before, we're in this weird time where it's like the Republican Party has become the party of bitter, old, angry men who are mad about the world, right? And they're angry and the world is just not working out the way they want it to, and they remember when it was the good old days and things were good, and sometimes they're anti-war and sometimes they want bigger, louder wars, and they're frustrated and sad and angry and that's just this party of bitter old men. And you look at the Trump administration, it is a collection of bitter old men. Mike Pompeo, Steve Bannon, I mean, it's just a collection of angry, bitter old men. John Bolton, and they're angry, bitter old men from many different walks of life, right? And they're just angry and bitter, and they want the good old days back, and they're mad about the way the world is moving, and it just makes them mad, and and it's almost, they represent the weaker wing of the American establishment, I would say. But in the Democratic Party, you have two wings. You have on the one side, right? On the one side of the Democratic Party, you have very, very optimistic young people that are inspired by the Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang kind of message, right? That economic times are hard. We need the government to step in and fight for the people. Big corporations have too much power. We need equal rights. We need to make a better country. We need a better tomorrow. It's almost kind of similar in a way in terms of emotions and aesthetics to the Kennedy phenomenon, I think. Now, obviously, I'm not endorsing Kennedy, and I'm not endorsing any of these people either, but it's similar to the Kennedy phenomenon, right? The reason that people refer to the Kennedy White House as Camelot is it was youthful, optimistic, it was coming out of McCarthyism, and it was saying we need to make a better America. It was linked to the Civil Rights Movement, and it's this kind of like, we're young people, we want to get involved in politics, and that's Kennedy. He created the Peace Corps, and he was into the space program, and it was kind of this young, progressive optimism. That's like one wing of the Democratic Party, and I would say that's probably the majority of Democrats at this point. The majority of Democrats, especially Democrats under the age of like 35, that's who they are. They're young, optimistic people who are worried about the future of their country. They want to make their country a better place, and they realize some of the big problems we have, specifically related to economics. That's the majority of the Democratic Party. However, the majority of the Democratic Party money and the majority of influence in the Democratic Party, not the majority of people that are Democrats, but the majority of influence in the Democratic Party, is coming from forces that are far more sinister. It's far more sinister than those bitter old men in the Trump administration. And that must be said. Those bitter old men in the Trump administrations, that's like low-level capitalists, right? That's fracking companies in particular. Fracking companies that think big oil is stepping on and environmental regulations are getting in their way. It's, hotel chains and small, low-level millionaires and billionaires that aren't part of the club and are watching the economy get worse. But among the big, powerful funders in the Democratic Party, you have the old money establishment, right? We're talking the New England wing of American politics, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, right? These are the entrenched circles of wealth and power in the United States that have been there since almost the beginning. I mean, for hundreds of years, these people have been the most powerful people. They've got lots of money. They at some point, I mean, these are folks, right? They don't even know how much money they have. At one point, they were trying to figure out in the 1970s how much money one of the Rockefellers had, and they couldn't figure it out. All these investigative journalists, they couldn't figure it out. It was so elaborately wrapped up in a network of so many trusts and foundations and try to figure out how much money the Rockefellers have. You can't do it. Figure out how much money the Carnegies have or the Vanderbilts have. You can't do it, right? These people are so wealthy and powerful that it's beyond anything we can imagine. And they're a small group of people, right? They're a very small group of people that and they're in banking, right? They're in oil, they're in banking, and they have a lot of power, and Silicon Valley is very much a wing of their influence. And the Council on Foreign Relations, for a long time, these folks were Republicans or they were in both parties. But it was really in the Obama years that we saw the shift of this old money establishment into the Democratic Party. I think it was about demographics. It was about the fact the country was changing. It was about a lot of different things. But regardless, the Democratic Party elite, the folks behind the Ford Foundation, the folks, George Soros is one face you can put on it, but it's that wing. That wing of people, right? The power behind MSNBC. Those forces are very, 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 very sinister, right? And, unlike those young people that are full of optimism, full of a desire to go out and make a better country, worried about the future, but still bright-eyed, still got their eyes on the horizon, these forces are loaded with pessimism. Right? And the way they see it is there are just too many people in the world. The human population has expanded. There are just too many people eating up too many precious resources on the earth. The people in the third world are breeding like rabbits. The people in the first world are entitled to this good lifestyle where they have air conditioning and houses and cars and decent wages. And we need to get used to slow growth. And you read the stuff that comes out, right? There's a very, very sinister wing. The richest of the rich, the ones who think more in terms of an oligarchical worldview, rather than, it's not that they believe in total free market capitalism. They believe in the old kind of British Empire Atlanticist mindset. Those folks are very, very scary. And in the Democratic Party, it's like we have a party on the Republican side that's a party of one soul, of bitterness, of dying, of longing for the old America, make America great again. And then in the Democratic Party, we have two souls. We have a young, hopeful, optimistic, and social democratic side, and we have a bitter, old money, globalist, international capitalist side. that is very, very, very sinister and views people almost like lab rats, on a table. I mean, it's very, very maniacal, and that's where we're at in American politics, and we're seeing that play out on the debate stage. So there you go, folks. That's what I'll say about the Democratic Party. But now is that time. I know you've all been waiting. You've all been waiting. Those of you who follow these lives, those of you who are part of the community that joins these discussions every week, you've all been waiting for this moment. You've all been waiting for this moment. And here it is. I have the new book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. Articles and Essays on Socialism by Caleb Maupin. It is now available for pre-order. You can order it on the link below. You can order it. You will get your copy as soon as possible. I want to thank everyone who was part of making this book happen. A lot of people helped me out in the process of publishing this book. It's here. It is available. And wow, here it is. City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. My new book. This is book number 1 of a 2-book set. Book 2 is mysterious, and you'll hear more about book number 2 as the process of me writing it continues. I'm writing it as we speak. But City Builders and Vandals in Our Age is finished, and it is available. Order your copy today. Right? And this is not a short book, mind you. It is 440 pages. And there's a lot in here. But it all revolves around a thesis. And that thesis is explained in the introduction. And I will read to you the opening 2 paragraphs of the book. City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. Throughout human history, 2 distinct trends have most certainly been present among us. There have always been city builders, innovators, scientists, philosophers, unifiers, heroes, poets, painters, architects, preachers, prophets, dreamers, visionaries, egalitarians, solidarity builders, rationalists, optimistic nonconformists, bright-eyed rebels, advocates for the downtrodden, inspirers, motivators, in essence, those individuals who push civilization forward toward a higher stage of being, driven by an inner flame of creativity and boldness. And these city builders have always stood in opposition to the efforts of the vandals, the raiders, machine breakers, hate mongers, ignorance celebrators, jealousy peddlers, demagogues, cultists, hedonists, self-destructive stoics, wreckers, persecutors, lynch mob leaders, dope pushers, snake oil salesmen, sadists, crucifiers, vulgar emotionalists, crass pornographers, bullies, bombers, and worshippers of darkness and primitivism. The designations of left and right in politics are rather new, rather relative to the history of human civilization. Here it is, folks. In this book, I talk about ancient Greece and ancient Rome. I talk about what's going on in China today. I see somebody's really asking a lot of questions about China. Read this book. I talk quite a bit about China. I talk about the rise of the Soviet Union. I talk about the Iran nuclear deal. I talk about the Trump administration and the divisions among the American ruling class. I talk about oil and the fossil fuel economy. I talk about a whole lot of very important issues. I talk about the mass shooting phenomenon. I talk about Saudi Arabia and its origins. This has quite a bit of content in it, right? And yes, as I do these lives, I'll be reading you little bits and pieces of it as we go along. And as we go through it, it's been published, there's an independent publishing company that's been set up, Revolution Air, that has published it, and that's where you can make the pre-order from. The link is below in the description of this. That's where you can make the pre-order from. It's available, and yeah, I mean, here it is. It's here. There's a lot there, and as we go on, we will be, I'll be giving you different readings from it and all that, but get your hands on a copy. Get your hands on a copy, and I really think this book is going to have an impact. This book is not about me. There's nothing about me in it. I mean, it's not, I don't talk about myself at all. It is not about me. It's about us. It's about the world that we are in. I talk about the Bernie Sanders movement in it, a big section on the Bernie Sanders movement, what it stands for, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, democratic socialism, the crisis facing the millennial generation. A lot of content in this book. So I urge you to get a copy of it. Read it, engage with what I have to say, because as I've told, as many people have told me before, they say, Caleb, you don't sound like a typical young millennial socialist. I don't, right? I'm offering something that is somewhat unique. And I have an understanding of the world that is not exactly where a lot of people are at. And I've gotten quite a few great reviews of it. I mean, people read this and they're kind of blown away. They're like, Caleb, we didn't expect this. Wow, we did not expect this. I mean, if you've seen my previous work, Getting Rich Without Capitalism and Oil in the Capitalist Crisis, this is taking things to a whole nother level. This is something particularly special. So put in your pre-order now, right? And I really think that we need to figure out how we can get the contents of this book all throughout the country. People need this book, right? People need to hear this message. If you tune in every week to our discussions, you know how important this message is. You know how important this is, and how much what we say is really absent from the discourse. The conversations that we have here on these lives are very much absent from the way Americans are talking when it comes to politics. And, we need this message to be spread. So get your hands on it, give it a read, write a review of it, promote it on Facebook, even if you don't agree with me, right? If you don't agree with me, post about it. Say, hey, look, this part, Caleb is just dead wrong about this. Do it. That's fine. I see someone named Martin is asking me how old I am. I am 31 years of age. That is how old I am. There you go. Yeah. This book is something new. So I hope you get your copy of it. Now, like I told you all, Book 2, this is part of a set. Book 2 is currently being written. And let me once again thank everyone who was involved in the process of creating this book. There's an acknowledgments page in this book, and it's very long because I got a lot of help from a lot of people. There's this notion we have in the United States that one is a self-made man, right? It's, I did nothing. Nobody ever helped me do nothing. I'm a self-made man. And it's a myth. It really is. There are no self-made men in the world as we exist. Human beings are collective creatures. We are collective human beings. We work as a group. There's nothing in the world that anyone can point to and say, I made it all by myself, right? Now you might say, well, what about a wood carver, right? He goes and finds a piece of wood in the woods all by himself, and he carves it up. Yeah, but who made his tools? Do you think he made the hammer all by himself? No. Do you think he made the saw all by himself? No. Right? No one can point to anything in the world as it exists today and say, I made that all by myself. This is my personal creation. No. Everything in the world is the product of collective human labor. Human beings work together, collectively, to produce everything in the world. Every product in every store is the work of hundreds or maybe thousands of people who create it, who then ship it, then stock it in the store, then sell it to you. We human beings work together collectively to produce things. The human experience, from the time we were hunter-gatherers living in tribes of 20 to 30, to today, where, you can have, like this cell phone that's made in probably 20 different countries or 10 different countries, right? Human beings operate collectively. And that's something that we cannot escape. And that's why I think it's very interesting, right? Russian President Vladimir Putin recently made a comment at the G20 that the idea of liberalism is over, right? That liberalism as a concept is played out. What is liberalism? Okay, and we need to, there's so much confusion, right? People think liberalism is left-wing politics, right? If you're a Republican, you're a conservative. If you're a liberal, you're like Bernie Sanders. You're liberal. You're more left-wing. That's not the definition of liberalism, right? And it's really silly, like this idea that well, if you're a normal liberal, you're like a Democrat. If you're really liberal, you're a socialist or a communist. No. Liberalism as a concept in politics, liberalism is the belief in individualism. It's the belief in the rights of the individual, and it comes out of the Enlightenment, right? That's what liberalism is. It is the belief in the rights of the individual, and it comes out of the Enlightenment. And economic liberalism is the belief in the free market, that the state should stay out and let individuals handle their finances, let individual businesses and business owners do their own thing. Social liberalism is the idea that people should live their own life the way they want. They should be able to, have gay marriage or smoke drugs or do whatever they want, right? Keep the government off your back. Individual rights, individualism, liberalism is the notion that the individual is the highest, is the highest thing, that individualism should come before all else. It is the naked celebration of individualism. And liberalism was certainly necessary. It was certainly necessary, in the age of feudalism, where people were viewed as property with no rights. The liberalism emerging and the Enlightenment was necessary. However, liberalism as a political view of the world is played out. It really is, right? We have taken it to such extremes that the West is, Western society, Western civilization is based on liberalism, and we're having huge problems. We have broken down the notion that human beings are collective creatures. We've forgotten that human beings need to be part of a group. They need to be part of a joint effort. They need to be part of a project. They need to be able to look at a map and say, this is where I am. They need to be able to say, this is who I am. This notion that you're an automized, isolated individual. It can only go so far because human beings are collective creatures. They are. The human beings are collective in nature. And so when Putin says that the liberal idea, has played out, has gone too far, that's what he's getting at, right? He's not saying that Democrats are to, and we need to be Republicans. He's not saying that we need to have right-wing conservative ideas. Liberalism is something in the United States that manifests itself on both the left and the right, right? The right believes in economic liberalism, and specifically neoliberalism, a very extreme interpretation of economic liberalism. That's Milton Friedman, Friedrich von Hayek, Ludwig von Mises. That's neoliberalism, economic liberalism. And social liberalism has been the field of the left. The left has been an emphasis on social liberalism. And as a result, we have millions and millions of people in the Western world who are very, very confused. We have a generation of younger people who don't know who they are and have almost lost their identity, right? Human beings want to feel like they're part of something. They want to be part of a group. They want to be part of an effort. They want to have a purpose in their lives. They want ideology. This is just the reality, and particularly postmodernism. Postmodernism has really pushed things to the point that this liberalism, this celebration of the individual above all else, has spun out of control, I would say. And I think that's what's being said. So, folks, I think it's going to be a short live today. I really don't have a lot more on my agenda to talk about. It's whatever. It's a lot of things going on. But hey, Swine Class is asking about LGBT, and I talked about that earlier, and Reverend Ernest Angley and other people are talking. But I want to answer your questions, right? Maybe there's a few things we can talk about. I'm not in a rush to get out of here. I got more things I can talk about. So what else is on people's minds? What's new? What's new in the world? I got more things I can talk about, right? I'm not in a rush. Comments about Hong Kong. Well, I noticed there was one fan who took the section of my live last week about Hong Kong and actually made it into a video. I came across it on Facebook randomly. I'm like, oh, that's me. And people do that, right? And I encourage people to do that. This isn't copyrighted, right? My conversation here, if you want to take a clip of a YouTube live of me and post it on YouTube, I'm not offended by that. I'm not going to sue you. And what I said about Hong Kong needed to be said, right? It needed to be said, and it should seem obvious. Whenever we talk about China, whenever we talk about these countries, whenever we talk about the countries that are being attacked by the United States, demonized in American media, you often have to just kind of get people to step back and say, wait a second, let's imagine that was our country. And a lot of times what they're saying, it's pretty quickly, maybe people aren't going to totally agree with your critique of U.S. foreign policy or your critique of the American media position, but they're going to do a double take. Right? The way Americans are trained to think about politics, it's like the American government is good or the American system is good. What we do, well, it makes sense. And what these other countries do, you have to look at it through a sinister eye. And that's just, you have to look at these things carefully. The Venezuelan opposition, for example, right? When I tell people these people go out and murder police officers, which they do, they actually strung wires across intersections to behead police on motorcycles, right? These are extremists, and that actually the Venezuelan government has shown a great deal of restraint in dealing with them. People kind of do a double take, right? No, they're just democratic, peace-loving activists, right? Well, everyone would understand that if in the United States there were people beheading cops on motorcycles with wires, people would be like, yeah, that's not okay. Okay, no matter what their cause is, no matter what their grievance with the government is, they can't act like that. They need to be dealt with. But, when it's Venezuela, we're just supposed to, and that's how people think. When it comes to the Hong Kong thing, I made the point that, Hong Kong being part of China, right, should extradite people who break the law in the Chinese mainland to the Chinese mainland, right? We don't have a rule in the United States that some city, people can break the law in the rest of the United States and then not stand trial for it. They just stay in that city, right? If Chicago doesn't have the right to just say, you know what, if you break the law in another part of the United States, if you break the law in another part of Illinois or in another part of Arizona or the USA, we handle it in Chicago. You get the special Chicago treatment, right? You break the law in New York City and you're from Chicago, we handle it in Chicago. No other country in the world would have that, right? If you break the law in New York City, you get extradited from Chicago to New York City to stand trial in New York City. That's just pretty standard, right? But because of, Hong Kong, one country, two systems, for a long time, they haven't handled it that way. And if you read what's coming out about the Hong Kong protests, they're very explicit about who doesn't want to change the extradition law. Big business. They're spelling it out there. Big corporations, big businesses in Hong Kong want to be able to go into the mainland in China, break the law, and not be held accountable in mainland China for it. That's kind of what's going on here, and that the Chinese Communist Party controls big business, and they control corporations, and they regulate much more tightly. They arrest and execute, billionaires. It's one of the only countries in the world that executes billionaires. I know in Iran there was a billionaire who also got executed, but other than Iran, China is the only country in the world that executes billionaires. They tightly control the business community, and there is a very wealthy business community in Hong Kong. And they don't want the danger of ever, even if they break the law in the Chinese mainland, they don't want to be extradited. They don't want to be extradited to the Chinese mainland. They want to handle it in Hong Kong, where they're the richest people and everything's kind of rigged in their favor. And, and it's just pretty obvious. And it's average working class people in Hong Kong that oppose these protests. And the protests are the rich kids. And they're out there waving the flag of the British Empire and talking about the Queen and, and how great it was when they were a colony of the British. Okay, do they have perhaps some legitimate grievances about corruption? Sure. Do they have perhaps some legitimate grievances about human rights? Sure. You never want to deny that these people don't have anything to be upset about, right? And, and the Chinese are the first to tell you their system is flawed. Their system has flaws, and they're not going to sit there and make it sound like their system is completely flawless, nothing goes wrong. And I'm sure that there are young people that are mad about legitimate things that are involved in it. But the overall thrust of the protests that are being celebrated by mainstream U.S. media, being promoted by mainstream U.S. media, that have an anti-China flavor to them, that are waving the flag of the British Empire, that make this extradition law their central issue, you look at it, it's a negative movement. It's a negative movement. The Hong Kong protest movement is not good. It's not good. It's fighting on behalf of the rich and powerful against what average people want, which is, and it's a defense of the big business community, and it's being supported by Western capitalism. So that needs to be said, and you don't want to lose sight of it. You never want to sit there and be like, I hate that, you want to, keep a cool head and realize that there are two sides to every story and such, but, at the same time, look at it, all right? So the central issue, I get a lot of flack for saying it. I did an interview, and I've talked about this before, but, the Tiananmen thing, 1989, right? Now, a lot of people lost their lives, very tragic occurrence, and no one's going to say what happened was good. But now even NBC and others are coming forward and saying that the overall narrative in mainstream media, that all these people were just in the square, peacefully protesting, singing Kumbaya, and got run over by tanks. That's not what happened, right? That they peacefully, were able to break away, and the tank thing happened the next day. That was like after the square had already been cleared. There was a guy in the square with the flag, and there's a whole thing about that. And one of the main grievances of the student protest movement in the lead up to the Tiananmen protests, one of their main grievances was the presence of black students on Chinese campuses. Yeah, that's Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times. All over China, not just in the capital, all over China, right? In the lead up to the 1989 events, students were protesting because black students were allowed to go to Chinese universities. The Chinese government had a scholarship program and was bringing black students from Africa to Chinese universities, and there was racism. And, there was rumors that some of these, Chinese, some of these black students were dating Chinese women. There were race riots. There were lynchings. I mean, where there crowds of students went and killed black students. And one of the main grievances of the student protest movement in China in 1989 was that there were black students, that racism was a big factor. Now, Nicholas Kristof, who was there, was writing for the New York Times. You can go look up and read his articles about it. He was there. Now, he stopped talking about it once the Tiananmen stuff started happening in June, but in the lead up to it, he was there. He was with the students, down with black devils was one of their slogans. No one ever talks about this. And like I said, do the students have other grievances other than racism that might have, it's complicated. These situations are very, very complicated. Right? And a lot of people get very emotional because of their experience. And that happens a lot, right? That if you go around talking socialism and communism in the United States, you'll meet somebody, inevitably, because this is the United States. If you hate communism, you come to the United States, right? No matter where you're from, right? You're from Eastern Europe, you hate communism, you come to the United States. You're from Cuba, you hate communism, you come to the United States. You from Venezuela, you hate communism, you come to the United States, right? You're from Zimbabwe, you hate communism, you come to the United States. The United States is like, it's weird. The Republicans hate immigration and all of that. We are like, if you're an anti-communist, if you're in a country and communists come to power and you don't like them and you've got money, especially if you got money, you come here, right? You get your visa taken care of, and we have got anti-communists from every corner of the globe in the United States. It's a reality. So if you're in the United States and you're talking about socialism and communism, you inevitably run into one of these people, and they don't have an argument. They have well, my grandfather, you don't understand. My grandfather, he experienced this thing happened to him in which somebody in a communist government was just horribly mean, and in some cases these people are lying, okay, and the stories you'll hear from like Miami Cubans are so ridiculous sometimes. And they're just so over the top, and and you know how things get on. People pass on stories from generation to generation, but in some cases they're not lying, and in some cases it's legit. Wars tend to have two sides on them, right? And you don't want to say that these things. Look, I've made this analogy before. You want to keep a cool head. You want to keep a cool head and realize that we do not understand. We don't understand Lenin. We don't understand the Bolsheviks. We don't understand Trotsky. We don't understand Stalin. We don't understand Fidel Castro. We don't understand this stuff. Look, people that grew up in the West with the level of economic development we don't understand this stuff. We don't, okay? And it took me a while. I was young and naive, but it took me a while to realize this. I was reading a history of the Russian Revolution at one point. It was by a Marxist, not by an anti-communist. And in it, they talked about how a week after the Russian Revolution, after the October Revolution in Russia, all these people were celebrating. Right? The fact that, the Bolsheviks, the anti-war party, had won, they'd seized power, they'd created the Soviet Union. People all over Russia were celebrating, right? In St. Petersburg, people were partying and celebrating. But meanwhile, the White Army was assembling. So like a week after the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks outlawed the drinking of alcohol, right? Because people were celebrating and partying, and they needed to get everyone into military ready to defend the revolution. They conscripted forcibly all the men, right? And they outlawed the drinking of alcohol, and they implemented the death penalty for drinking alcohol. Right? Now, why did they do this? Because they're big meanies? No, because they were facing an onslaught, and the onslaught came. And the Russian Civil War, you talk about the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution, where there was the White Army, right? That was in there slaughtering whole villages, killing people. 15 countries invaded Russia after the Russian Revolution. 15 countries. It was an ugly civil war. It was a military situation. It was a kill or be killed situation. And the Bolsheviks implemented the death penalty for drinking alcohol. And they had to have enforced it at least once. I cannot imagine ever being in a situation where I would be able to kill somebody for drinking alcohol. That's because I grew up in the West. That's because I've never been in a civil war. That's because these folks were in a kill or be killed situation. They were fighting for their lives, right? It was kill or be killed. It was an atmosphere where people were starving to death, literally starving to death. It was an atmosphere where it's going to be us or them, where you had to have the most ironclad military discipline. This is something we don't understand. Okay? And so, on the one hand, you'll get people that want to idealize it. And they want to go, well, Lenin was good and Stalin was bad. No, the Lenin stuff was very authoritarian, out of necessity. It was a situation we don't understand. That's what you have to understand here. These are people that are in very desperate and dire circumstances, fighting for their lives, fighting for their communities, fighting an onslaught, starving to death. We can't relate to it. The reason that I am a so-called tanky is because I look at what situation they were in 1917, where they were, implementing the death penalty for drinking alcohol and facing an onslaught of 15 countries invading and people were starving and all of that. And I look at where they were by 1936. And in 1936, they were a world industrial superpower, and they brought running water and electricity to the entire country. They had wiped out illiteracy. They had accomplished real miracles, right? By 1954, they were in outer space, right? If you look at what they accomplished in the face of circumstances that you and I cannot relate to, circumstances that you and I would just collapse and die under. If you can look at what they accomplished, that shows you that we don't need capitalism. This notion that you have to have capitalism and you can't do anything, that's malarkey, right? With socialism, They got themselves from some of the most desperate circumstances to the status of being a global superpower. That shows that socialism works. Right? That's what I take from it, is that the rise of Eurasia, of Russia and China, their ability to turn themselves around and become global superpowers with socialism, to get themselves out of some horrific situations of poverty and civil war, to become, astoundingly powerful. At this point, China is the second largest economy in the entire world. To do that was nothing short of a miracle. And it involved lots of ugly, ugly things that you and I never want to be involved in, like shooting people for drinking alcohol, for goodness sakes, right? That to look at that experience and say, oh, socialism failed, it doesn't no, socialism clearly works, right? And it got people that were in situations we cannot relate to. I am not in a position to pass moral judgment on the Bolsheviks for implementing the death penalty for drinking alcohol in 1917 when they're being surrounded, when they're being bombarded. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you almost want to compare it to like Valley Forge, right? I mean, look at what the conditions were like at Valley Forge during the American Revolution, right? I visited Valley Forge when I was a kid. My family, we didn't take vacations. It had to be educational. So we visited Valley Forge, and we walked around and listened to, a tour guide lecture us on American history. And look at the conditions that people were in Valley Forge, right? The kind of situations that people are in these really extreme war situations, it's very hard to put moral judgment. It really is. You can't put moral judgment, Should the Bolsheviks have implemented the death penalty for drinking alcohol in order to defeat the White Army onslaught in 1917, in October, December of 1917? Should they have done that? I don't know. It sounds awful to me, but then again, I wasn't in those circumstances. I wasn't in that kill or be killed situation. I don't know. And if you ask me about, things that happened in the Soviet Union, it's clear that there were things that went on that were clearly wrong. It's also clear that there are things that went on that I don't know. I don't know what I would have done, and I'm not in a position to pass judgment on it. What I do know is that with socialism, not with capitalism, they achieved real miracles. And that's it, right? There's no need to be a blind apologist. There's no reason to sit here and say Stalin did nothing wrong, Mao did nothing wrong. These people are sacred. What they did. No reason to go there. There's no reason to go there. Socialism works. There is absolutely no question that socialism works. Anyone who tells you that socialism failed is lying to you or just ignorant, okay? Right? Socialism has proved itself to be successful over and over and over again. As an economic system, if you look at what Cuba has accomplished, if you look at, all of these countries, so many countries have had socialist revolutions, they've wiped out illiteracy, they've industrialized, they've raised the standard of living. Meanwhile, the countries that have remained capitalist, go to Central America, right? Walk through Central America, go to Guatemala, go to Honduras, right? Come on. It's just a joke, right? You can go throughout the developing world. I'll tell you a story. When I was 12 years old, my father, I'm not going to get into the circumstances. Regardless, I went to the country of Ecuador. It was the first time I'd ever left the United States. I went to Ecuador, with my father. I was a 12-year-old kid, never been outside the United States. And this was the year of 1999. And it was after Ecuador had just been forced by the World Bank and the IMF to adopt the dollar as its currency. And it had crashed the economy. So I went to Ecuador when it was being gripped by neoliberalism. I went to Ecuador with my father. As a kid, I got out of that plane. I got out of the airport, and I saw so much poverty. I had never seen that level of poverty before in my life. I saw desperately poor people, crowds of desperately poor people outside of that airport in Ecuador. And I was like, whoa. It was an experience that changed me. Seeing that level of poverty. And the next day, I went around. I was only in the capital for a little while, but I went around the capital, Quito, with my father on like a tour bus. The level of poverty that I saw in Ecuador, I had never seen anything like that, right? I'd never seen that, and I didn't know it at the time, but at that time, Ecuador was being financially destroyed by neoliberalism, by libertarianism, by free market capitalism, right? They were privatizing their oil, they were privatizing their gas, they were selling off all their natural resources to the international bankers. They were moving rapidly toward capitalism, the unknown ideal of Ayn Rand. The country was being gutted. They had lost even their own currency. And that was the country, and I was a 12-year-old kid, and I was blown away by what I saw. Changed me. I went back to Quito, Ecuador in 2013 for the World Festival of Youth and Students. I was a delegate representing the communist group I was in at that time. I was their delegate, one of their delegates representing this communist group that I was in at the World Youth Festival. And it was after they had had Rafael Correa, a Marxist, a socialist president. He wasn't, he never took the country as far as Venezuela and Bolivia have gone. Never fully, they never really got to socialism. He was trying to move the country towards socialism, and then now his successor is pulling everything apart. That's a whole other story. But under Correa, the country that I saw in 2013, the same streets I walked down, the same airports, it was a new country. It was a new country. It was like, yes, there was some poverty. There was, old ladies trying to sell me little boxes of cigarettes, and they were probably homeless. But it was a new country. Paved roads, right? Paved roads. The level of development. People, families with cars. I mean, it was like they had, in just a few years of a socialist government that nationalized their oil, that brought in Cuban doctors. I saw with my own eyes Cuban dentists, right? I mean, they had tents on the side of the street. They didn't ask any questions. Didn't matter who you were. You just got in line and a Cuban dentist would fix your teeth. I saw what socialism, not even fully achieving socialism, but just movement towards socialism, had accomplished in Ecuador. Blew my mind. I mean, the Bolivarian government under Rafael Correa in Ecuador had turned the circumstances in the country around by 180. I mean, the Ecuador I saw when I was 12 years old and the Ecuador that I saw in 2013 were night and day. It was, but again, right, socialism's failed everywhere it's ever been tried. Don't you know that? Socialism just makes people poor, right? I mean, there's no effort to talk to people realistically. And, I've been to Venezuela, I've been to a lot of countries, and I must say that free market capitalism has kept the world in desperate poverty, and socialism is the hope. I mean, there's a reason, for goodness sakes. There's a reason that, that people all over the world know about Cuba, that the Cuba, compared to the Dominican Republic, compared to Haiti, compared to other Caribbean islands, it's doing pretty darn well. They have difficulties there, but nobody ever says when they're rioting in Haiti, because they of the fuel prices, when people in Haiti are eating dirt mixed with oil, nobody ever says that's capitalism in Haiti. It is capitalism in Haiti, but no one ever says, oh, look, capitalism is destroying. No, they never say that. Right? I mean, when people in Honduras, right? I mean, when people are fleeing, all these refugees pouring into the United States, right? They're pouring into the United States in big numbers. Where are they coming from? Are they coming from socialist countries? No, they're coming from Honduras. They had a socialist in Honduras in 2009. The USA removed him in a coup, and the country has been wrecked ever since. And the elections have been rigged, and people have been rioting, and there's been death and fighting and drug cartels, and big percentages of the country are illiterate. Don't speak Spanish. They speak the indigenous language. No one's ever taught them how to read, how to speak Spanish. There's whole sections of the country, no running water, no electricity. I mean, it's been kept in chronic poverty by the rule of Wall Street, right? Guatemala. I mean, goodness gracious, right? Nobody ever talks about this, but yet every socialist country, if they're not immediately on the level the West is on, that proves socialism. I mean, it's so obvious that socialism works, right? Despite, and there's ugly stuff there, and these people are in circumstances that you and I don't understand, right? Let me put it this way, folks. right? When I was a leftist, when I was like, I am a leftist, but when I was going along with the movement, we hated Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was an awful holiday, right? It was a celebration of the slaughter of the indigenous people. You did not celebrate Thanksgiving. Awful. Well, I don't condemn Thanksgiving any longer, right? I condemn the slaughter of the indigenous people. I condemn racism. I condemn any racist portrayal, any racist narrative that comes with Thanksgiving. But I think that the holiday of Thanksgiving is a good thing. Why? People that celebrate Thanksgiving, they're not celebrating all the evil things that were done to Native Americans. They're celebrating the fact that people have been able to raise their living standards and overcome hardship, right? They're giving thanks for what they have, right? And I think when communists celebrate the Soviet Union, when communists celebrate Mao or Stalin, they're not celebrating all the bad things that went on. They're celebrating what was achieved, which was countries rising out of poverty, which was countries being able to beat back the forces of capitalism, the ability of countries to lift up their heads and overturn centuries of oppression, the ability of Russia and China to go from being deeply poor countries to being global superpowers. That's what people are celebrating, right? I can celebrate Thanksgiving without embracing all the ugly things in U.S. history, and I can celebrate the experience of the Soviet Union, and I can look at what was achieved in socialism when I try to point toward a way out for the United States. And I think that that's what needs to be had. That's what needs to be said, right? Is that you don't have to embrace every bad thing that happened in socialism to recognize that socialism works, that there is something that can be learned, and that capitalism is a system. The greed is good system is not what the world needs. The world needs to get out of the capitalist system. So there you go. I've been rambling for a long time, but what else is on people's minds, folks? What else is on people's minds? Wow, Caleb, you definitely made it big time. The right-wing lunatic fringe has found you. Hey, anyone's welcome. Lisa Hauserman, can you talk about immigration reform? Not really. Kinky thanks me for my good lecture. Well, thank you, Kinky. I'm glad to always raise good points. When will you get an admin for the chats? That's actually a good idea, but maybe not. I don't know. What do you think of Michael Parenti's writing? I love Michael Parenti. Absolutely love Michael Parenti. I've learned a lot from him. I really have. I recommend Michael Parenti's writing. I really do. I've learned a lot from Parenti. I quote from Parenti. And not just his stuff on, geopolitics and stuff. His work on, ancient Rome is very, very good. And I've cited him when it comes to Rome. Yes, Parenti is great. I'm just looking at what people are saying. Other people love Parenti as well. Parenti is a great, great writer. He's getting older. I talked about Tulsi Gabbard earlier, Joe Howard. But yeah, there's a lot of things to talk about. But, in future lives, I am going to be doing some reading from this book because there's a lot there. This book and the thesis of this book, someone says the Democratic debate was Fidel Castro's nephew, and they sent me a super chat to say that. I don't know what that means. Okay, but if you want to get your point out there you go. Someone's asking me about open borders. And, I actually... that's where I do disagree, okay? The slogan, open borders now, which I've seen, it's not a sensible policy. I'll just say it, right? The socialist countries all have borders. Every country in the world has borders. Open borders now is not a sensible slogan. Not wanting to scapegoat immigrants and blame them for the economic hardship in the United States, I'm for. Right? Not enhancing the oppression these people face. I'm for legalization. But open borders? No, you have to have a border. You have to have a border as a country. And see, that's when leftists say open borders now, what are they saying? To an average person, you walk up to an average person, you say, I'm for open borders. And they're just like, oh, okay, so anyone can just, yeah, right. It's not a sensible policy. If you can't explain your policy, If you can't explain your policy to an average person in a way that makes sense, you shouldn't advocate it, okay? I've said that before. People who say abolish the police, right? That's not a sensible policy. To an average person, they say, okay, so then someone's breaking into my house, who do I call? Right? And then it gets a little silly because you'll get this answer. They say, well, you'll call the Revolutionary Workers Fight Back Committee that will, and it's like, that sounds like police, right? You're saying you want to transform the nature of the police force. That's what you're saying. You're not saying abolish the police. You say that we need a state that operates in a different way, that serves working people overall, new institutions. Right. You still want police. You just want to change the nature of the police. You want to change the nature of the state. You want a working class government. You want a government of action that fights for working families. You don't want to abolish the police. To an average person, when they hear you say abolish the police, they think you're crazy. Right? And you say open borders. I want open borders now. You sound crazy, right? Every country in the world has borders, right? That you need, you need to put your policy forward in a way that makes rational sense, right? You don't want to abolish the police. You want the police force to actually serve the community. You want a police force that is not practicing discrimination. You want to change the nature of the state. You want a government that serves working people. That's what you want, right? So say you want a government of action to fight for working families. Say you want to end police brutality. Say you want to end discrimination. Say you want to change the nature of the police department. Don't say abolish the police, because you sound like a nut. Someone's praising me for my sobriety here, the fact that I'm speaking, sensibly. Leftists need to speak sensibly, okay? Again, if you're in this to prove to the world how radical you are, grow up, right? Our country's facing big problems, and you need to talk to people in a language that actually makes sense. I've said this before, and if you haven't watched, I made a video called The Actual Nature of Revolution. It was a class I gave in New York City, and you can actually, it's not just me talking, but it's like an interaction with the students in the class. But in that class, I said that if you're a serious leftist, a serious socialist, you should always have an answer to the question, what would you do if you were the president? You should always have an answer on the tip of your tongue. Someone says, okay, if you were the president, what would you do? You should have an answer like that. And so many leftists I meet are like, well, I don't want to be the president. I want to overthrow the government. I want a whole new socialist society. And it's like, please, no. If you are an actual socialist, you need to be able to say, if I was the president, I would immediately hire the unemployed. I would hire all the people that are unemployed. I would put them to work. I would bring the troops home from overseas, and we'd start rebuilding the infrastructure of the country. Right? You need to say, if I were the president, I would change the trade relations. We would have win-win cooperation, right? You need to say, if I was the president, I would outlaw private prisons immediately. You need to say, if I was the president, you need to have an answer to the question, if you were the president, right? You need to present yourself as a serious political force. You cannot present yourself as someone who wants something, crazy. Right? People don't want further decay. They want a way out of the crisis. In 1932, William Z. Foster, probably the greatest communist we've ever had in the United States, William Z. Foster, ran for president of the United States. And he wrote a book for his campaign called Toward Soviet America, but the slogan of his campaign was, a revolutionary way out of the crisis. And he ran on a platform of what he would do if he was the president of the United States. In 1940, Earl Browder, kind of a renegade, not a very good communist, but he was representing the Communist Party USA, which at that point was a strong revolutionary organization. And when he ran, his slogan was the way out. The way out. And his campaign also said, if I was the president, this is how I would fix the country. If you are a socialist, right, you constantly need to be explaining to people what you would do to improve their lives, right? And how you would move the country towards socialism to make their life better. And if your rhetoric doesn't do that, you're not really helping anything. You're putting on a song and dance, right? And I think that needs to be said. And that the Communist Manifesto, interestingly, it talks about a line of march. A line of march. Right? A line of march. A communist should always be presenting a line of march, right? And if you are serious, right, you need to be presenting a line of march. I have raised the slogan over and over again, we need a government of action to fight for working families, and that's what we need, right? The capitalists tell us the government is best, that governs least, just let the economy take care of itself. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Now, someone's saying, Deng 2020. Well, Deng Xiaoping is dead. I doubt he would ever run for president of the United States. But we need a government of action to fight for working families. And that must be said. And, there's a section in my book where I lay out a line of march for the United States of specific policy changes that I would advocate, right? And that we do need a way out. In this section, I talk about the potential for American rebirth. And it must be said, I talk about a lot of things in the book. You ought to get a copy of the book, write a review, love me or hate me, get a copy. It's good stuff. The next live, I'm going to be reading sections from it. I'm going to be reading a particular section from it that I think folks here will like. So I think I'm going to wrap it up, folks. It's been a lovely day. I wish you all the best. Get a copy, pre-order your copy, link is below, and I wish you all the best. Have a good day. Best wishes to all of you, and have a good evening.